We only have one more lecture in this series and this month on Blavatsky, and I have somewhat shifted the individual topics about, primarily because a very important book, Blavatsky's The Secret Instructions, of which I will mention some more, of which all these, I thought that all these years I had a copy. The gremlins, who are very active in my house, have made off with it. I'm sure that when I don't need it anymore, they will return it. That is their custom, you know. So there is another copy of the book being shipped to me right now, and it looks very promising that I will have the book in hand a week from now, because there are that book and its contents and various passages there that can be quoted or referred to, I think, are of very great importance. It is, let's say, it is more esoteric and then the one that I have with me, wouldn't you know it, it's always the least important things that remain with you, and the important ones, they go away, which is the Secret Doctrine commentaries. And so I think that we'll be in a little better position by next week to review that when we have the book in hand. So let me then again just very quickly, especially chronologically, create a framework for you within which our discussion will make a certain amount of sense. Let us say the magnum opus, as it was conceived of and as it has been publicized all these many years, of H.P. Blavatsky, with the several volumes, depending on which edition you have, of the Secret Doctrine. It was generally assumed that that contained the entirety of her message, with maybe very few exceptions, and that therefore it was sort of the perennial textbook of the esoteric tradition. This conviction has been shaken in recent years because it was discovered that there are statements by H.P. Blavatsky herself which are not terribly complimentary about her own chief work, at least not in a certain sense. She indicated that the Secret Doctrine was really a book for the general public, and I have mentioned this before, so if I'm redundant, please forgive me, and that there are instructions which she was eager to share, which are other than those present in the Secret Doctrine, and that many of those could be of very great use. The general context within which these comments find their place is that, if we want to play a little bit with words, which is always fun, that her attitude toward her writings was that she was trying to instruct people and to stimulate people for the purpose of transformation, and that this has been very easily and very quickly mistaken for information. And so most of us, when we contacted the secret doctrine, and I had a lot of wonderful nights with it, especially because when you don't have any disturbance, that's the time to read the secret doctrine. And it's exciting and wonderful, imaginative writing. It beats most science fiction works and things of that sort. But let us say, I had the suspicion, almost from the time that I had my first set of the secret doctrines, which is the old 5-volume set, this is the first volume of it, that this was not really the entirety of her message, and that her real message would really be somewhat different from this. Yet, of course, I had no idea in what way it would be different. But apparently, according to the various documents that exist, very soon after the secret doctrine was published in 1888, easy to remember, but by 1 year later, 1889, she announced that she needed to complete her work, and that the secret doctrine, while useful, was not really it. So in 1989, she formed a group of students who she felt might be responsive to the message that she still wished to convey, and referred to this association of students as the esoteric school. When she formed the esoteric school in 1889, just 1 year after the publication of the secret doctrine, and she, if that is of any interest, I don't have the addresses, although I'm sure to those of you who are familiar with London it would be of some importance, that she began her esoteric meetings at the home of her disciple Mabel Collins, and who was a very interesting lady in more ways than one. She wrote some beautiful poetic material, and she, well, let's put it that way, she was an esoteric wild woman. And it's no secret by this time, believe it or not, one of her possible boyfriends was none other than the murderous Jack the Ripper. And this is not, again, this is not a joke. I'm sure it was not a joke, but let's say she began to discover some curious circumstances about this gentleman whom she met often, and then she found out that he brought a suitcase which he secreted somewhere in the room wherever they met, and that there were medical surgical instruments there which had quite a bit of coagulated blood on it. That was right at the time when the Ripper was very active, and so let us say she then very wisely and very rapidly distanced herself from this bloody episode, to use the favorite British term. And why I brought this up, I don't really know, because I don't really deal in salacious material, but I think that my hidden intention is that HPB was no prude, you know, And in any event, Mabel Collins had a house, and there they had the meetings, but very soon, I think about a year after they started to have the meetings, by 1890, she moved the meetings to another house of another disciple, and this other disciple was Annie Besant. And then she reorganized a little bit a group of students. Now they were referred to as the inner group rather than the esoteric school, because she openly said that her esoteric school was a disappointment. Unfortunately, the whole new instructional cycle, which she happily began at that time, ended very soon, because a year after the move in 1891 she died. So let us say she was quite obviously in the process of adding on other very important, perhaps the most important chapter to her work, and certainly more voluminous than a chapter, and this was in the form of verbal instruction in these two classes, in the two locations, then there were these were transcribed. I think there were people there with a form of shorthand and so forth, and the hope was that this would be made available, but to a more limited readership. Now, the main reason I bring this up is because what happened, in my opinion, mine is only one opinion, what happened was that the readership of the Secret Doctrine and of her earlier book, Isis Unveiled, which I always like to brag about, that it was set in type and printed in our glorious city of Los Angeles. I think it was number 38, if I remember the house number well, Bernal Avenue in East Los Angeles, where her two disciples, the Price brothers, P-R-Y-S-E, James Morgan Price and John Price was a printer, where they lived, and they were very devoted students of hers, and that is where her first book was, let's say, put together. Now, once again, I brought that up primarily indicating that there has been work and instructional and inspirational work done by her all along, and practically to the very end, to her death. Now, I think I already mentioned earlier, but this is, I think, a point worth repeating, that this this situation of a body of literary material which conveyed, at least ostensibly, occult information, such as the Secret Doctrine, and on the other hand, the beginnings, at least, of a deeper, of a more esoteric and in a profound sense really more individually transformative work which was in process. That this pattern is by no means unusual, and that it harkens back to a very ancient way, a very ancient pattern which appears already in the mysteries of antiquity in the Mediterranean area. That the mysteries, as far as we know, because one thing about the mysteries is that they are mysterious. And this mysteriousness in turn involves secrecy, a great deal of secrecy. And so that the ancient mysteries were partaking pretty much each in their own fashion, or always of two great elements. And I mentioned these before, and these in Greek were called theoria and theurgia. And therefore the theoria is in the nature of narrative, of story, of drama. And most of we have some information, for instance, that the mysteries of Eleusis were contained in the initiatory process, a dramatic performance into which, in a properly mysterious way, the initiate was drawn himself or herself. And so that, let's say, when the story of Persephone and of her mother Demeter and all of these properly mystical and mysterious events took place, the candidate to the mystery was part of this. And on the other hand, there was prior to the dramatic initiations, and perhaps even subsequently, there was always quite a bit of instruction of a theoretical nature. And in some ways the dramas themselves may be regarded theory. So ever since then, this pattern reappears in the various initiatic bodies, esoteric associations, lodges, and so forth, where there is teaching on the one hand, and there is, let's say, the inducement to mystical experience on the other hand. Unfortunately, the ability of HPB to follow this pattern openly and in a manner in which it could be more, therefore, more, because of the openness, more easily recognized, was greatly limited. The limitations that I mentioned before were primarily of a chronological nature, because she didn't have the time to proceed now to that personal instruction of a mystical nature owing to her demise. But on the other hand, there were other reasons, and very powerful reasons, which resided in the culture. And as I think C.G. Jung, who was an esotericist of sorts himself, indicated, the 19th century was the true Dark Ages. And he meant Dark Ages in terms of the light of the spirit. As far as the 19th century would proceed, was always to the intellectual level. Theory, teaching, and that kind of instruction. That's all that went on in the schools, and that's all that people would really, for the most part, be interested in, even in the kind of esoteric school that Blavatsky was engaged in teaching. Now, so we are in in a predicament. And we didn't really know about this predicament until my good friend Michael Gomes of New York, the great theosophical historian, unearthed this situation and actually discovered the documents which were not available just comparatively short time ago, and then managed to edit them and to publish them. So the meetings that she conducted in 1889 in the first esoteric school, the transcriptions are in the book H.P. Blavatsky, The Secret Doctrine Commentaries, and the ones that she conducted in the inner group just a little bit later are in the volume Esoteric Instructions, for the copy of which I am expecting to be delivered to me shortly. So this can give you a general idea. Now from the general idea we can proceed to some specifics, and these specifics you may interpret, and I'm sure that some of you will, initially as a sort of a criticism on my part, because I am going to point out both the advantages and of, let us say, the difficulties, the Achilles heels of some of what came forth as the teachings of H.P. Blavatsky, and subsequently really constituted, if we want to use that biblical term, the canon of occultism and its heart, the body of teachings and writings that were called theosophy. And yet it is important to voice these concerns which I am voicing here about these various areas of teaching, because the inability of necessity, because the documents were not available, the inability of her students to proceed to these more profound considerations that she put forth have left their stamp on the corpus of writings and of teachings of H.P. Blavatsky, and then from there they radiated out eventually into an almost innumerable number of schools, organizations, lodges, whatever you wish to call it, all regurgitating these teachings, but without having access to the more profound instructions which she was working on. So what really happened was that only one of the two pillars that held up the esoteric temple, like the pillars of Solomon, with the two pillars of Jachin and Boaz, only one of these pillars came to be utilized, came to be studied, commented upon, written about, and a very one-sided stamp was placed by this on the entire effort of the esoteric tradition as it came forth at the end of the 19th century and then throughout much of the 20th century. And once again, there is no one really to blame, because it was the the fact that the more profound instructions were not available, because she wasn't able to put them forth. And so really only one side of her work became known and constituted really the backbone of the esoteric movement led by Theosophy, but certainly also followed by a lot of other people. Now, in order to set that record, or begin setting that record a little bit right, and a lot of my fellow Theosophists would be unhappy with me, and if these lectures get to them, they will be unhappy with me, because it sounds like I am criticizing the teachings. You know, I am not criticizing the teachings, but I am criticizing the circumstance that what would have completed these teachings, what would have made them work much better, what would have made them an ongoing, living, mystical reality in the psyches of a lot of people, did not happen. And this lack of happening wasn't anybody's fault. It was the Grim Reaper's fault, perhaps, for taking poor H.P. Blavatsky out of this world too soon. And the rest of it was largely circumstantial. I have no recrimination with any of the subsequent theosophical writers and teachers or others who did not use the term theosophy anymore for their approach, because they worked with the material they had. They couldn't work with the material that they did not have, obviously. That some mistakes even that way were made is obvious. And so I have now, let's see, is it 4 or 5 individual points of teaching, which I am going to pick apart and try to indicate as to why these teachings were and are one-sided, and why their presence in the esoteric world has been flawed, and often gravely flawed. But you got to remember, with anything and anybody, people, just like we are all flawed, maybe we see that very easily in each other, but far less easily in ourselves. You know. But obviously everything in this world is imperfect, including ourselves, and our teachings and our writings, and even our lecturing. So you got to take that into account. But here are a number of items which were considered and still are considered, not only by theosophists, but by practically the whole esoteric world in the West, and to some extent even in India and places where it spread, as being the constituent parts of the esoteric tradition, but at the same time this very conviction has great deficiencies. Number one, the first point, and this shows that the influence of the culture, the common mind, whatever one wishes to call it, of any particular historical period, has a great influence on what is being taught and written and experienced by people, even in the esoteric field. And we got to be careful with that, because that kind of contamination can really hurt, let's say, our spiritual future. Now, the big buzzword, bar none, already toward the end of the 19th century, when H.P. Blavatsky was there, the big buzzword was evolution, which the preachers with a Southern American accent on radio and television tend to pronounce evolution. You see, now, because of course Darwin's theories represented and do represent an alternative to the creation account of the Old Testament, and as such they are regarded by those who believe in the Bible very literally as being a great evil. Now, where the problem for us comes in, is not with Darwin's theories and what remains, let's say, in biology still of the evolutionary theory, because like all, well, how should we put it? Like all theories, ideas that are new and exciting, they don't remain new and exciting forever. And after a while people say, well, so what? And that's pretty much where the theory of evolution rests now. It has a certain respect. It is accorded a certain respect and validity in biology, but it is not the end and all and the goal of everything and the great explanation of life and of being forever and ever. It's nothing important now. It's nothing new, and it has. And I have no objection to it. I'm certainly not a Bible fundamentalist, but let's just say, if you really, and neither was I terribly interested in biology, it's sort of a form of living materialism, because that's what all biological beings are. They are living matter. But in any event, that is really not important. But let's say it's not a big buzzword now, for sure, but it certainly was then. And so H.P. Blavatsky, wishing to make her work interesting and acceptable to people, I would say sort of propagandistically gave the impression as if she believed in, or she was teaching, a kind of evolution which would be an evolutionary process parallel to the biological evolution, a spiritual evolution. And then occasionally she made statements that were contrary to that, and made fun of Charles Darwin. One of the incidents that is reported is one that I really love. She and Colonel Olcott, when they were still in New York and where they founded the Theosophical Society in November 1875, had a large apartment in New York. That's where they gathered there, still at that time, very few disciples. So in the foyer of that apartment, coming in, as standing on a pedestal, was a stuffed monkey, I think an orangutan or a chimpanzee. The ape was dressed in evening dress with a beautiful coat and white shirt and necktie, and I think he had a top hat, and underneath it was an inscription, Charles Darwin. So, you know, that since we all descend from monkeys, well, we can make a monkey out of Charles Darwin. But let us say the indication was there that she and Olcott certainly did not have some kind of a very great reverential attitude toward Charlie Darwin. That being the case, we need to take a look at the sort of almost dogma-like status that was accorded to the evolutionary theory with a spiritual slant by the occult people, and beginning with the theosophists. Darwinism is a simplistic system, which, when you just look at it and say, well, it's a steady stream, a steady ladder of evolution from the amoeba to the elephant, and perhaps, if you want to include ourselves in it, from the amoeba to the human. So from a tiny little unicellular organism, so it develops and develops and develops and becomes bigger and bigger and more complicated. Now, the ideas of a spiritual evolution taught by the occult crowd and my theosophical friends was an exact parallel of this. And so in the beginning, just a tiny little spiritual seed that comes down into this material world, and then over aeons of time it slowly evolves, it slowly develops, becomes more and more complicated, and finally ends up a psyche, a soul, whatever you wish to call it. Now, there is a great deal wrong with this kind of development. First thing that's wrong with it, and I could enumerate probably quite a few, the first thing that's wrong with it is that it does not seem to involve the individuality, the individual spiritual intention and energy for greater and better things in the evolving beings. That it creates the impression of an automatic process, and you wonder, all right, so if it's a sort of a steady movement from the amoeba to the elephant, or from the amoeba to us, where is really the spirit? Where are the stirrings of transcendence? Where is the ability to discover higher and transcendental things? And so you can see that the application to the psychospiritual side of nature and of human nature, of the evolutionary principle, is gravely flawed. It's very it has great big holes in it, and it also indicates that, well, if indeed this is an automatic process, that we are evolving, first we are maybe developing some emotions, and then we are developing some thinking, and then maybe we develop some more intuition, to use the Jungian functions and so forth. You know, where is the real self? Is there a real self behind all of this? Is there a reality that is working its way out of a material container? Or is it just sort of an automatic process, now this and now that? And I think this aspect of the transposition of the evolutionary theory to the spirit, therefore, was a great difficulty, and it did not do really any good. Now, the present scientific opinions, for instance, are not justifying a sort of simplistic theosophical interpretation. And so it was necessary for the theosophists, for instance, very soon after H.P. Blavatsky's death, to elaborate and to complicate their descriptions of this so-called spiritual evolutionary process until it became really a fantastical picture. And I enjoyed reading those fantastical pictures, and so do many others. But this entire evolutionary, spiritual evolution theory requires too much faith in what could be called the physical exegesis of the secret doctrine. Exposition being there. If the secret doctrine is, however, not a physical, a story of the physical world and of the physical humans, but if it is, as I have indicated, and that is increasingly being recognized as a possibility, it is really something else. It is a mostly mythological account of the coming into the world and the existence there of a spiritual reality. So this is the creation myth, and the occult history then becomes as I mentioned last time, a myth. And we had a very, I probably mentioned him already, we had a very interesting gentleman here years ago. He gave several lectures here. He was a great nephew of Madame Blavatsky, Mr. Boris de Zirkov, and it was Mr. de Zirkov who came up with the idea and with the expression. He said, if you want to use the term evolution, all right, but you may wish to add to it self-directed evolution. In other words, from the beginning, there is a self there. And that is the one that directs the situation. It's not a great big automatic process, and then somehow along the line, somewhere between the, between the mastodon and the elephant, then all of a sudden a spiritual being enters the situation. So there is the application of the evolutionary principle to the spiritual development, especially of the human here on earth, is gravely flawed and ought to be restricted and not utilized a good deal. So there is the problem. This is not really such a big problem now as it would have been, I don't know, in the 1890s, because most people are not that wild about evolution. It says, well, if evolution isn't really what it's cracked up to be, then so what? Now, by saying this, I am not denying the possibility, but I only call it a possibility, of a very slow development, a very slow unfoldment of the powers of the spiritual nature within its material containers. That the, let's say, that the ability of the seed of the gods from the aeons, from the transcendence, the ability of that seed to become more effective, to be able to express itself better, to be able to maybe control and improve its physical environment and things of that sort. This would be an understandable idea, but to somehow make a spiritual Darwinism out of the development of the spirit here on earth, I think is a very, very great mistake. Now, with that, but you know, maybe I'm also beating a dead horse at the same time, even as others do, because let's say when I first came to this room and to this house, when Besant Lodge was just, you know, going great guns here, we never had less than 100 members, signed up members of the lodge, and I tell you, honest to God, they were darling people. Many of them were British, and many of them were connected with the motion picture industry, you know, very creative, intelligent, nice people. But, let's say, these were the pillars on which theosophical teaching was based. Evolution, reincarnation, masters, and let's see what else was there. Yeah, and karma. That's the one that I like least, and that's why I forgot it. You know, and I was very uncomfortable with these teachings. Not because I denied their veracity to a certain extent, but I question their real import for us. You can believe in all of these and remain the biggest dumbbell in the universe. You can hold these things as the most important teachings in the world, and yet, let's say, be as unspiritual as all get out. And of course there are a variety of reasons for them, one of them being that belief does not bestow wisdom. Does not be only the spirit indwelling, what HPB would have called the higher self, only that is the one that bestows wisdom. Only that is the one that moves toward the eternal spiritual reality, because it is part of them. Everything else is flawed. And therefore, these, let's say, in this case, the application of the evolutionary principle to the human spirit and to the human soul should be viewed with a considerable jaundiced eye. It doesn't really lead anywhere. But so I think we can sort of leave it at that, and when it comes right down to it, there are statements, of course they're true all down the line, of H.P. Blavatsky, that she was not really an evolutionist. And she was not really. He said, the development of the spirit within people is not going anywhere except to itself, and then through itself to transcendence. Everything else is inconsequential. And that was really, and there is a good deal of evidence that really was her attitude. So let me evolve out of evolution now and move a little further. Now we have a biggie, reincarnation. It is generally assumed that reincarnation is a sort of overall dogma of the occult or esoteric field. That all esotericists believe in reincarnation. Interestingly enough, I have pages and pages of statements of Blavatsky where she denies reincarnation. And yet then I have pages of her where she affirms it. So what did the old gal really mean? What is really going on? Well, now with the publication of the esoteric instructions, we have a clue. And the clue is primarily that she indicates in those instructions that, yes, there is a principle of repetition and of return, but it's very different with the individual. We have statements now where she says that it is very unlikely that most people's spirit, when it is reincarnating, would reincarnate here in Earth and would reincarnate in humans like us. And she sort of reminds people of her students there that, the reality is immense. It is without beginning and without an end. And in all those various parts of reality, your spirit may go. Why should you assume that you need to come back to this place? And when I read that, I was clapping my hands because, this is really the place where I don't want to come back to. I don't know too many other places. I have not been, to my knowledge, been born on Mars or on Mercury or on the Moon. But I really don't want to come back to this place. And she said there are all kinds of places to go, spiritual places. And she, on other levels, other planes of existence and so forth. And therefore the rigidly adhering to the idea that you have to come back here is nonsense. Now, I'm sure that would come as a big news to a lot of people. However, I think it is quite important because, for one thing, it demonstrates a principle that it should be demonstrated as much as possible. And that principle is the transcendental freedom of the human spirit. I don't have to come to this place. There are other lokas, if you want to use the Sanskrit elsewhere, that I can go. So there is movement, and undoubtedly one or two lives here on earth are probably not enough. But once again, realize that there are many possibilities. There are many kinds of movement of the spirit, and that if you get close to your spirit while you are here, if you even achieve a modicum of closeness moving to union, your freedom increases greatly. Which I think is a very sensible and very helpful way of looking at the situation. Now then, of course, we have to keep in mind that as far as we are able to determine, this kind of an attitude that she manifests toward the future of the soul, whatever you want to call it, was present in the esoteric tradition among the ancients. I well remember, I even remember the place where it occurred, but that's of no significance, when the great Gnostic scholar Professor Gilles Quispel was here, and we and a rather large party had dinner with him in a place, and somebody approached him with the idea, in terms of Gnosticism, of reincarnation. But not only that, they asked him about reincarnation and karma. And he said, reincarnation perhaps. Sometimes happens, sometimes not. But he says, karma, no. In other words, the concept of karma is not part of the Western esoteric tradition. But let us say a flexibility, a malleability of sorts about, let's say, the movement of the soul and the spirit is definitely implicit, and in the esoteric teachings explicit in Blavatsky's writing. So don't think, if you believe Blavatsky, that you have to come back. Or even that you have to go to a particular place. But she did indicate that since the spirit of the human is immortal and eternal, that obviously the involvement with one lifetime may not be sufficient, may not be enough for it. So reincarnation, perhaps, but where and how we cannot determine. In fact, I have just sort of a intuition, which is very personal, that Blavatsky would have been quite happy with the sort of esoteric skittishness of George Ivanovich Gurdjieff, who, if you read his writings, and some of his disciples find, the whole business of lives is very strange, and that you may perhaps reincarnate backwards. That you are here now, but your consciousness may find itself in an earlier historical period somewhere, and that also is possible. And that the memory, or so-called memory of past lives, should not be confused with an absolute proof of a past life, because we can remember all kinds of things. The reach of our consciousness, of our esoteric consciousness, is vast. We are just not aware of it. But according to what I have seen in HPB's esoteric writings and elsewhere, we may think that we remember a life in ancient Egypt of our own. But what we are remembering is a life. It may not be necessarily ours. We have the ability to tune in to various historical periods and to various situations, but that is no proof that we were there ourselves. but that our consciousness has tremendous abilities and tremendous freedom. And that's really, in many ways, much more interesting. So, let us say the issue of reincarnation is much more tenuous, much more changeable than we generally thought. And what we need to remember that even now when we're here in an embodiment and when we put the body aside, that if we exercise it, if we have come close to the indwelling spiritual nature, we have a tremendous amount of freedom. The human is the freest spirit, the freest soul in the world. But the human has to be aware of that and to exercise that freedom. And when a deterministic attitude toward the ongoing life of our spirits and souls is, I think, gravely mistaken. Now, let me even throw another stranger proposition to you now. She pointed out that not everybody is immortal. Okay? How do you like that? And this in turn she pointed out, but it's rare, but there is a definite possibility that where a human soul has torn itself away from its spiritual roots and has become so corrupted and so evil that actually the connection with the deeper spiritual self breaks. And she ended up that particular paragraph by saying that there are more lost souls that you may encounter in this world than you think. Very interesting. And I think it also makes sense. I really have a hard time imagining that a Joseph Stalin or an Adolf Hitler would be reborn as an innocent, darling little baby somewhere and have all of a sudden be good. You know, but some things that humans do and are can break the connection with the spirit. But they're still here, they're wandering around, but they are not connected with the spiritual nature anymore, and therefore she called them lost souls. Quite interesting and very, very different from a lot of occult teachings. Now we come to my favorite, karma. Now this is, as you know, this is strictly an adaptation from the religions of India, namely Hinduism and Buddhism. It is intended, and it was intended, rightly so, I think it was intended at Blavatsky's time and thereafter as a welcome replacement for such things as the Christian heaven and hell, and also purgatory. What is the intelligent way of looking at it? And that seems to be really the way that HPB looked at it. Namely, that there are certain forces that are set in motion by humans here on earth, and that they work themselves out in this life or in future lives. So that however to make out of this a kind of a moralizing doctrine, that say if you're not going to behave well, then in your next time there is going to be all the karma. You know that I was present in Santa Barbara where a couple of pronunciations were made which I thought were really extremely revealing at a meeting with the, large meeting with the Dalai Lama. And people asked him, and he said, yes, of course there is such a thing as karma. It's just one of these many laws and procedures that we live under. So you just go ahead and you cope with it and try to do good and be compassionate, and you don't have to worry about your karma. So, which I think is certainly the best attitude. At which time, and I really liked that one, the Dalai Lama was also asked, let me see, which one was that? He was asked to, let's see, somebody asked, and that this is a misunderstanding of Buddhist teaching that one runs across. I have run across it with some people too, that if you take the vow of the Bodhisattva that you will help people, then you have to stay here on earth until the very last soul has been liberated. Horrible idea. And so somebody asked the Dalai Lama that way, that does it mean that we have to continue be here and continue doing the compassionate work and so forth? And Dalai Lama said, you work for enlightenment. You go get enlightened, then you will know what to do. That is in this nice, terse Tibetan fashion. And my gosh, I almost jumped out of my skin for joy, because this is really the proper attitude. The task is there, and if we pursue the tasks of enlightenment, then achieve a certain success in that, then everything else will really fall into its place. But if we don't achieve that, then it's all fantasy and ultimately all misery. So this is also very, very good and very, very important to be able to work on it that way. So the importance of karma, in my opinion, of the principle of karma has been exaggerated. I can see it as a substitute for hellfire and damnation, or even for the duality of heaven and hellfire. So when it's considered with just when it's considered with insight and wisdom, and I would say the kind of wisdom that Blavatsky put forward, then it appears just another factor of life. Karma is another factor of life. Just like when you kick the wall with your foot, your foot is going to hurt. When you don't kick anything hard with your foot, you're not going to get hurt. So we need to keep in mind that there are forces set in motion by way of various actions, by various thoughts, by various feelings that we express, and that there are results. But these are not anything to greatly worry about. If we are well intentioned, if we are going by good teaching and inspiration, then we don't need to fear karma. Now then, perhaps the most portentous and the most controversial is the teaching that because is widely disseminated and popularized, that's why it is so controversial, and that which I would entitle the teaching about masters. Now, this is a very historically a somewhat complicated issue, but it has to be probably mostly considered from a more transcendental level. Now, it is true. It's undeniable from the biographical material, from her own statements, and from many of the activities that were going on around and sometimes by HPB, that she felt, believed, was convinced that she was under some inspiration and guidance by beings that were not physically present. This apparently, this way of being instructed and living appeared quite early in her life. I can't think at this moment of the exact age that she was, but as a fairly young girl, she went to with her father, the Cossack Colonel von Hahn, the two of them. Her mother was always off with the literary circles in St. Petersburg and so forth. She didn't go anywhere else. But they went to London, where the jubilee, a big jubilee, diamond or something like that, of Queen Victoria, or Golden Jubilee, was celebrated. And this was, of course, a big occasion, although now Her Gracious Majesty Queen Elizabeth had surpassed in her reign even Queen Victoria. But there was great big parades and all of that, and so according to her account, she was standing with her father on the side of the street as the procession was marching by, and here were dignitaries from India. And one of these dignitaries, I think on horseback, man with a very big, beautiful beard, rode by and, according to her statement, looked at her and cast a very powerful glance on her. And she was completely transfigured by it. She said that this was an influence in her life and would continue to be so, and that she has met, as she subsequently put it, her master. And then later on, as the mythology of the masters continued, this particular Indian person was identified as a Rajput prince who was in India at that time and who came to the festivities, whom she at least called Maurya. And from then on, she identified this mysterious person who was in India as her master. All right, now what about this business master? First of all, I believe I am right that in the British educational system, a teacher is the master. He's the schoolmaster, and so that the master really just meant teacher. Now, all right, that's one. Then later, times goes by, and she has gotten out of Russia, and eventually, ended up in New York. We are back to 1875, the foundation of Theosophical Society. And then she said, and even had she wrote or copied some documents to the effect that some mysterious persons who were her teachers, but who in that case were in Egypt, and there was even a name for one of them, Tuitit Bey, had inspired her and basically ordered her that if she could, she should now found a society of students and start a work wherein certain esoteric teachings can be disseminated. In other words, that the order to found the Theosophical Society came from a mysterious man with a Muslim name, Tuitit Bey, Bey being a title, and that is why she called the people together who founded the Theosophical Society, that she was instructed to do so. And as time went on, not very long time after founding her society, well, she received invitations from real flesh and blood people in India that they would welcome her and anybody she brought with her if she came there, because there was a lot of important spiritual work to be done there, and they would be very happy to have her there. So she and Colonel Olcott packed up and sailed for India. Now, at the same time, she said, well, I went because, the invitation sounded great, but it was approved by my master. And so, let's say a whole, a sort of an ongoing program of hers to indicate that she had some mysterious contacts, that these contacts were not, as far as one could tell, physical, neither were their dreams, but that these masters belonged to a, let's say, a visionary reality. Now things got more complicated, and I'm not going to go into all the details. These things are available in books anyway, that subsequently, when she and Colonel Olcott decided to remain in India, when they bought the estate, the Adyar estate where the Bay of Bengal and the Adyar River come together, and set up their headquarters there, which is still there, that people, the Hindus particularly, didn't think that there was anything peculiar about having a master. They said most of their masters were gurus who were there, but also some that they just communed with otherwise. So it was really no great big deal. But you know who took umbrage, shall we say, and then really just about wrecked Blavatsky's career, were those kindly, godly people, the Christian missionaries. The Christian missionaries wanted to do these people in, because Blavatsky and Colonel Olcott was championing the heathen natives They were encouraging the Hindus to be good Hindus and the Sikhs to be good Sikhs and so on and so forth. This went very much against the purposes of the missionaries. So let's see, to make the long story short, a conspiracy against Blavatsky and her work there developed, which was peppered with a great deal of lying, and in which some people who actually were her employees were working for her, particularly a French couple named Coulomb. They were the people who betrayed her, making up stories about her and about the fact that she faked the existence of these masters and of the letters that she got from them and the communications, and it became a colossal scandal in India for a variety of reasons which don't really concern us all that much. But you've got to remember now, here was the British Raj only about 20-some years after the Great Rebellion, which was a terrible big situation in India. And so the British officials were very concerned about people coming there and maybe causing the natives to rebel against the British rule again and cause, troublemakers. And so here came a Russian woman, although she was already an American naturalized citizen. She became a naturalized citizen within a very short time that she left America. She became American citizen. And a Yankee from Connecticut, namely Colonel Henry Steele Olcott, and these people established themselves there and became very popular with the native population on religious grounds, because they encouraged their religion, so working against the missionaries, and so particularly the missionaries, but also some of the government officials would have liked to get rid of them. And eventually they made life so uncomfortable for Blavatsky and for Olcott that they left India. And while Olcott came back and he was the president, and he continued living in India till the day of his death, which was about 1906 or so. But Blavatsky went back to England and to Europe, other European countries. She completed the secret doctrine and tried to put forth her esoteric teachings, and then very soon after the turn of the century she died. But let's say this was again considered a very big black mark against her, that she, as they say, was successfully accused of fraud in order to make it appear as if she had these mysterious masters. Now, there was really no fraud involved. Some very reputable people who were there testified to that effect, but they humiliated her greatly so that she didn't return to India. Now, all right, that was sort of the main thing, and the idea that, let's say, her experiences with her masters, of which she spoke now and then, and included in her correspondence and so forth, these things, let's say, stirred up a certain kind of imagination in a lot of people. And before you knew it, all of her, not all, but a great many of her students, her disciples, they were all they wanted to do was get hold of a master. And she she didn't tell them to do so, she didn't encourage them to do so, and she told them, look, when the pupil is ready, the master will appear. Don't push it, guys. You don't imagine things. Just you be ready for greater, more profound spiritual development. When you do the master's work, which was to spread the teachings of Theosophy, then you're pleasing, and then maybe sometime you will have a contact. But as particularly after her death, the master business became a big thing among Theosophists and subsequently of other occultists, and everybody wanted to become a pupil of a master. And it really was not a very happy condition. It really brought the movement into, if not exactly disrepute, but into a questionable condition. However, I was always leery of the master business. I've said that before, and that was quite a heresy. I mean, I didn't go out and yell at people that there are no masters. First of all, how would I know whether there are any or not? But let's say I had a feeling, and after all, I am not the Pope. I am not infallible. It's about time that they have a Hungarian Pope. They had a Polish one, but in any event, it's not that there was some kind of profound knowledge there on my part, but somehow the way the master business was taught, not only in the Theosophical Society, but in other movements that here was Alice Bailey, who created not only masters or teachers, but she said a hierarchy who ruled the spiritual destiny of the world, the hierarchy of the masters and so forth. In fact, there were various splinter groups that went away from the Theosophical Society, who really made an even bigger hullabaloo about masters than any of the Theosophists could do themselves. By then, of course, HPB was long gone, even Colonel Olcott was gone, and Annie Besant was quite put out with what has been made out of the teaching of the masters. And now this I know because I know the people who were there. Now we are now up in the mid-1900s, and she ordered her associate and friend C.W. Leadbeater, who had a great reputation as a seer, at least some of it really quite deserved, and she said to him, Charles, you have to write a book about the master business, because we have to correct the wild rumors that are out there. And she was primarily referring to what Bailey started. Now the reason I know a little bit about this is because the helper and secretary of C.W. Leadbeater, who was in Sydney, in Australia, was the Scottish academic Ernest Wood. And I knew Professor Wood later on when he moved to America quite well, and he used to tell this. I think he also gave it in writing. He said that Bishop Leadbeater resisted with every fiber of his being. He didn't want to write a book about the masters. But Annie Besant ordered him to do so. He said, we have to set the record straight. This is what we say. So what really happened? if that is of interest to you, was that Annie Besant tried to keep certain aspects of teaching and of experience sort of undercover for a small number of people, for whom she called the esoteric school. And those people were told about the masters, but nobody else. And she thought that that would work and she could get away with it. But then some people, even though they were obliged to, they swore an oath not to give out the esoteric teachings that they were told, they broke those oaths, and now the master business was all over the place. And so she felt that the record had to be straight. We have to tell our version of the situation. And so Professor Wood and C.W. Leadbeater sat down, and Leadbeater dictated to Wood, and Wood put various things in by also asking the other. They wrote a book called The Masters and the Path. It's a very interesting book. And if you ever read it, keep in mind that this was the reason for writing the book, that there have been wild and unfounded rumors and inflation of the concept going about, and that Annie Besant wanted to set it right. Now, that's pretty much where the situation stayed. But let's say all of this did not really convince me. I don't know what this, as it was told, the master business seemed, to say the least, incomplete to me. Now maybe that just proves that I'm a contrary cuss, and that I like to contradict people, which has been quite true throughout my life. And it's often quite enjoyable, although sometimes you suffer penalties. In any event, here I was. I said, all right, this is something that I don't understand, yet Blavatsky was apparently involved in it, and so forth, so there must be something to it. But I just never could get a feeling as to what is really to it, until. Here was, now we have entered the early 1960s, and a man whom I respected tremendously, namely Carl Gustav Jung, died, and very soon after his death a book was published, Memories, Dreams and Reflections of C.G. Jung, edited by Aniela Jaffe, which were statements and stories that Jung told Jaffe while he was already gravely ill in bed, and she wrote them down. And then she made a sort of autobiographical book out of it, subsequently called Memories, Dreams and Reflections, the things that she, sometimes Jung was talking in Swiss German, and things that she wouldn't understand and all of that. But she wrote everything down and she put together. I know that our friend Dr. Sonu Shamdasani, the great editor of the Red Book, also doesn't like Memories, Dreams and Reflections very much. And I understand his arguments. But Dr. Sonu Shamdasani, if that book hadn't come out, the Red Book would have never been published either, because this made the way for it. It's really a very important book. Now, all right, I read it with great delight, and maybe by the second reading or so, I came across something. And that was the Jung. Of course, Jung was already mentioning there and elsewhere that he had as he often called it, a fantasy figure by the name of Philemon. But when you look at some of the things that he wrote, he had an immense regard and respect for this figure. Yet he never said more about it. Now, so Jung writes that he had this figure called Philemon who used to come to him and talk to him, and then he went to Geneva, I think, where there was, before the United Nations, there was the League of Nations, and all the politicians coming together and eating Swiss cheese. In any event, Jung met a diplomat from India, and they were talking, and he told this to Anil Yaffe, it was written down, and the diplomat said to him, we have in India, it's very common that we have a guru, a spiritual teacher, and he said that that when we get a certain age and we do our pujas and our meditations and so on, we usually have a guru. And then he said to Jung, I have a guru, however, who is not in the flesh, and that is Shankaracharya. Of course, that's the founder of Vedanta philosophy. And then Jung adds to it just one sentence that he said to Anil Yaffe, now I knew what and who Philemon was. And I think he used the word somewhere in that book, saying the way it appears in the, I don't have I had a German copy of Memories, Dreams, but anyway, in the English they call it, as if he said, my ghostly guru. Well, I think what he said, mein geistiger guru, and that this was translated as ghostly, and geistig is not ghostly, geistig is spiritual. In any event, possibly an important light, at least important to me, went up in my mind that never left him. I says, there it is, there it is. This is the mystery of the masters, like Philemon. Now, that's great because it made sense to me, but can I make sense of it to you? I don't know. But I think, let's say, what I can communicate from my intuition is only this, that it seems that when a person comes to a certain point in his psycho-spiritual development, and certain things begin to open up in his or her mind, it often happens that a mysterious figure comes and instructs the person and helps them. There are indications that some of these figures have even said, well, we have to come to you this way, because if we only came to you in a dream, or if we only came to you without being seen, you wouldn't believe us. And that this is part of some people's psycho-spiritual makeup, that when they come to a certain level of spiritual development, an otherwise invisible but to them visible spiritual instructor comes. Because there is evidence for that in other quarters, quite aside from theosophists, quite aside from all of this, and certainly in countries like India and elsewhere. So now I think, and of course I can only conjecture, that this phenomenon is the basis of the theosophical mythos of the masters. Blavatsky had no way of explaining further of what she was experiencing. But I said these figures, and there was more than one. There was certainly Muria, Kutumi, another one, two of them. You know, they come to me and they instruct me and they help me. And if indeed she was a messenger, which is the thesis that I started out with, then it's quite understandable that a messenger would have helped us. And so I think we have a clue that in the inner worlds we have access to teaching, to help, to assistance that is conducive to our spiritual development and sometimes to spiritual things that we have to do. And that this needs to be taken into account, and I think that all the other explanations about masters are just that. They're attempts to explain something that ordinarily would be inexplicable. See? Now, I just offer that as a suggestion. I mean, it was not given to me with 100,000 trumpets. You know, I never considered it, but it was a conclusion that I came to on the basis of what me looks to be like truly reliable information. And if we translate what has happened in the past into these terms, then I think we have maybe solved an important riddle and perhaps also facilitated possibly our own spiritual life and the spiritual life of others with whom we may have contact. And if that is the case, then I think that this is perhaps a good discovery. And I have found that when discussing this matter very privately with one or two theosophists whom I respected very greatly, they tended to agree with me and said that something of this sort would definitely be a good explanation of the master phenomenon. So here unfortunately, all of these things became popularized, they became bowdlerized, corrupted in various ways, elaborated beyond credibility, and this has brought the esoteric movement and the theosophical movement a lot of grief and a lot of misunderstanding and ill repute. But fortunately, we have now information to the effect as to the manner in which a lot of these insights came to Blavatsky, the manner in which she wished other people to come to similar insights, and also to some extent, as we now indicated, the sources. So I think that one conclusion that one could come to as we conclude is that, excuse me a minute, that the day may be here, the may have dawned, when the disclosures that were made by H.P. Blavatsky and the sources of those disclosures can now appear in a different light, of greater credibility, of greater compatibility with the progress of philosophy and religion in the culture, and that therefore, let's say, a rebirth of the esoteric tradition is a definite possibility as a result of that. Because the work of the messengers never goes away. It may go underground, some people may come and dress it up and corrupt it, but it is there. And therefore, I would conclude with the thought that Blavatsky's work is still with us. Blavatsky's work has not only a past, as the books indicate, but it has a future. And if we look at it intelligently, reverently, intuitively, spiritually, then we can partake of it, we can profit from it spiritually, and it can redound to ours and to the humanity's benefit. And I would say that there are people among us, and don't you torture me about this now later on, because I will resist, that I think I have met at least two people in this life who had the kind of enlightenment, the kind of wisdom which put them in touch with the inner master. And that these people have done great and wonderful things spiritually. And if it was possible for them, it is possible for others. It even may be possible for us. But in any event, the reality of the experiences and the disclosures of H.P. Blavatsky and her fervent desire and determination to convey these to others and to try to facilitate the enlightenment, the union with the eternal self of as many people as possible. This intentionality is still with us, and with the grace of greater spirits, and with our honest seeking and determination to know more through our gnosis, it will be fulfilled. I am convinced it will, and in fact I see signs of that fulfillment arising now. I hope that the intuition is correct. If not, then it is wishful thinking, and by gum, what is wrong with wishful thinking? We all do it now and then. But I think it is such, if you continue to pay attention to this amazing vehicle of the greater and of the other worlds that was, and perhaps still is somewhere, H.P. Blavatsky, then we will be well rewarded. And maybe our little get-togethers here will be also conducive to that, and we shall conclude them next time. Meanwhile, once again, thank you, H.P. Blavatsky, and to the forces and the spirits and the spiritual teachers who inspired you and who sent you here to help us. Thank you, thank you.